On Sunday, Nintendo streamed the top 4 of the first NA Championship qualifier for 2023. Quick spoiler warning, if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know who won yet, I will be discussing the results of the event in parts of the video. I caught most of it on stream and did an analysis, which I'll link in the description right away if I remember, and a couple hours late if I forget and someone has to remind me to do it in the comments section. Say what you will about me, but I know myself. On stream, what they showed was the top 4 bracket, where they had Starburst playing Jackpot and Duck Gang playing Last Resort round 1. Without context, that's a terrible seeding decision. With context, it's arguably worse. Let me explain. Starburst is the best Splatoon team in North America, having been beaten by non-Japanese teams an alarmingly small number of times. To my knowledge, Jackpot is the only team out of these 3 that has ever beaten Starburst in a tournament set of Splatoon 3. That happened fairly recently, so it is a significant result. I don't think anyone who's been watching the scene can make a good faith argument that their tournament results justify any other decision than to seed them numbers 1 and 2. Putting the 2 top teams against each other in round 1 is the most amateurish rookie tournament organizing mistake. If you're not sure why, watch my video on tournament seeding and then come back. Don't worry about me, I'm just a digital projection of Gem's consciousness, I'll still be here. In one way, Nintendo is off the hook for this. Nobody seeded this bracket manually. The seeding was actually based on an earlier round of competition. Teams played matches with each other in something called a ladder format, which we'll talk about in a second, to figure out how they should be seeded into a top 16 bracket, and from there, the bracket played out until we had a top 4 that looked like this. So it's Starburst's fault then, you might say, that despite being the best team in North America and the eventual winners of the whole tournament, they ended up being the 5 seed in the bracket, so they made it more difficult for themselves. The problem with that is that the rounds of competition that they lost were formatted really poorly in terms of competitive integrity. When I say competitive integrity, I mean that the best team is most likely to win. Low competitive integrity would be like a little kid getting mad that you caught up to them in a game of tag, and suddenly deciding that the tree they're standing right next to is a base, and that you can't tag them if they're touching it, without this rule having been decided until now. It's cheating. It's having rules that are easily exploitable. It's anything that makes it so that a team that wins in a fair game will lose here. The way Nintendo formatted the first round of competition was using the ladder format. A ladder is a very informal method of competition, where teams click a button online to look for a match, and a match is made for them with someone else who's looking for a match at the same time. They play, the system tracks who won and who lost, and then they ready up for another match. The format is great for a couple use cases. One is when you have a more formal tournament, but you want for there to be a structured way for players who are out of that tournament to be able to keep playing competitive matches that mean more than just casual pickup games. Ladders provide that, last for an arbitrary amount of time, and help players find those matches quickly, all of which are big advantages if you're using them for that purpose. For some time now, Ludi, video on what that is linked above, has held ladder tournaments to give tournament organizers a lot of data points on the teams that compete to help sort them into divisions. This is a useful system because the goal of the tournament isn't actually to reliably find out which team is the best, unlike in a format with more competitive integrity, but to get every team as many competitive matches as possible against a wide variety of opponents. When you try to use a ladder as part of a formal tournament, it creates problems. Firstly, ladders inherently give advantages to teams that play more matches. If my team wins 12 out of 12 games and yours wins 14 out of 14, yours is going to have the better record, even though, for all anyone knows, your opponents were easier to beat than ours were. The amount of time it takes to play turf war matches is purely constant, except for factors outside the actual game, like how long players take to ready up between games, how long your opponents take to enter the lobby, how much communication is needed between players and tournament organizers during the match, just a lot of annoying things that it's really unfair to penalize a team for having to put up with, possibly through no fault of their own. Also, matches are made not based on which matches would give the most information about which team is the best, but based on who's available to play when you look for them. It's totally possible to dodge the best team in matchmaking and come out on top because they never got a chance to beat you. Starburst and Jackpot never met in the ladder, but it still decided that Jackpot was better based on their results. In fact, Jackpot dodged every team that made the top 16 except for one, Hypnosis, which went on to tie for 5th place with 4 other teams. They really did kind of hit the jackpot with the lineup of teams they got matched up against. That's not to say they weren't ultimately good enough to back up being seeded highly. I do personally believe Jackpot were actually a top 2 team in the event, but it's a great example of how ladder formats have lower competitive integrity. Starburst, on the other hand, lost to DNA in ladder, and then ended up being matched up to play them a second time where they lost again. Having to play the same team that already beat them a second time impacted their record negatively, dropping them by at least 1 seed, possibly 2. Now I know what you're thinking. Jem, how can you say this is the best team in North America if they're losing consistently to another team? Well, the other thing I didn't say is that this whole ladder format was done exclusively in Turf War. Like I mentioned in yesterday's video on the subject, every tournament North America runs is in the ranked game modes because we believe they have a higher level of competitive integrity than Turf War does. In ranked modes, advantages that you win are cumulative. In Turf War, you can be winning the game for 2.5 minutes, but with no way to end the game, all it takes is a single mistake with 30 seconds left to promptly have all that success erased, and even though you played better for longer, the other team still wins. Imagine you're playing a soccer game and you're up 3-0 with a minute left, but instead of needing to outplay you enough to score 4 goals and take the lead back, the other team only needs to make 1 good play because they're capable of somehow removing your 3 points from the scoreboard in the process of scoring once. This actually happened to Starburst in the Enter the Splatlands Invitational that happened a few days prior to Splatoon 3's release. The preliminary rounds of competition that determined the event's seeding were all in Turf War, and one of Starburst's streamed matches against Super P involved Starburst maintaining a consistent lead for most of the game that they only lost because of 1 fight in the last 15 seconds. Starburst got the bottom seed at Enter the Splatlands because of their Turf War results, but then went on to win that whole tournament once they moved on to the ranked modes that were actually determining who won. That seems to be a pattern here, because they did the same thing in the NA Championship qualifier. Starburst lost a few matches to teams they normally beat under other circumstances during the Turf War rounds, and ended up as the 5th seed for the event instead of the 1 or 2 seed that any tournament organizer in their right mind would have given them if it had been seeded manually. But once they got to the bracket round, they didn't lose a set to anyone and clinched the qualifying spot from the winner's side. Starburst's seeding wasn't the only seeding that was bizarre. The top 4 teams of the event were the 1 seed, the 5 seed, the 7 seed, and the 11 seed out of the top 16 bracket. And the 1 seed wasn't the winner either. Clearly, the ladder format that determined the seeding didn't do an excellent job of predicting who was going to win the event. Predicting who is going to win the event is the single criteria by which your ability to determine the seeding can be judged. And so we end up in the deeply ironic situation that the tournaments that get the most viewership and the most attendance, the one that even casual players are likely to know about, also have the least competitive integrity in their rules and format compared to any other competitive Splatoon event that's ever been run. The wins that top teams post proudly to their Twitter pages, the pictures of them hoisting trophies, come from the events that had the weirdest, least fair rule sets. I don't think everyone at Nintendo is unaware of this fact. There are certainly some staff that won't be in touch with the competitive Splatoon community, an unfortunate number of which are certainly in upper management, but Nintendo has been working with the competitive scene on events for years now, and if they wanted to run a tournament exactly to the competitive scene's specifications, they could absolutely be doing that by now. They're choosing not to. When you think about the actions of a business entity, it helps to think in terms of their incentives. What is it that they want? What do they benefit from? Here are some things we know Nintendo wants based on its past behavior. It wants a lot of control over its intellectual property, more than most publishers. This makes sense because Nintendo makes its money on its first-party games, unlike other console manufacturers, and losing them or letting their reputation be tarnished in any way would be fatal for them. It would be like Disney losing Mickey Mouse. Nintendo wants to maintain a family-friendly image and create games that anyone can play with anyone else. Many of its developers, notably Masahiro Sakurai, have gone on record stating that they want to deviate from the hyper-competitive idea of PvP games and create experiences that are enjoyed casually first and competitively second. Nintendo games are played overwhelmingly by casual audiences. The competitive communities are always a tiny fraction of the audience for even their most competitively viable titles. As such, Nintendo doesn't see a clear and obvious route to return on investment for putting money into esports. What they do see is potential marketing material. If they put up a decent-looking tournament with G-rated casters and advertise it, casual audiences will see other people playing the game and be reminded of it, want to watch and cheer for it, and try the game out for themselves, or maybe come back to it after a hiatus, growing brand loyalty and increasing the likelihood they buy the next installment. But for a casual audience to really appreciate what they're watching, the tournament needs to feature the way the casual audience plays the game, which is in Turf War, the only PvP mode that's unlocked from the very beginning. So even though Turf War has less competitive integrity, Nintendo is incentivized to run it in their events anyway to show off what that casual game mode looks like in the hands of really skilled players, to show that skilled players are supposedly willing to take it seriously. This is not the version of esports a lot of Western audiences want. We want what athletic sports have here. Strong traditions of competition passed down generations, prestigious championships, mythologized heroes of the game becoming household names across the world. We want crucibles for self-improvement, a symbol or even literal realization of the American dream. Nintendo wants return on investment. That sounds shallow and greedy when I put it that way, but that is a valid concern for Nintendo to have. Esports are a bubble, and the bubble is popping. All sorts of investors have been buying into a ridiculous cycle of hype over esports, and are starting to realize they're not actually making money on it. People have used League of Legends teams as investments, buying a team not to help build it, but to sell it at a markup at a later date. But League of Legends itself doesn't actually have a profitable esports division. Teams are losing money. The leagues are losing money. It's only arguably worth it to Riot Games in that it ends up selling more character skins, and Nintendo doesn't have microtransactions like that as a monetization strategy in their first-party games. There are no media rights to sell to television networks in the way that professional sports managed to do. When Amazon got the media rights to Thursday Night Football from the NFL, hardly the most important, most watched content block, that deal was worth $1.2 billion, which is pretty close to a lot of people's valuation of the entire esports industry by itself. If Nintendo invests in its competitive communities, it's going to have to put up money that we've shown very few mechanisms for making back. In a way, Nintendo could be said to be protecting us from the eventual rug pull that is the typical esports venture capital startup. If Nintendo does want to invest in esports more, it's going to have to invest extra resources in event security, because esports spaces are places where adults and children compete as equals, and if Nintendo takes responsibility for the safety of events, any misconduct that happens at those events is their PR nightmare to deal with. When the Smash community had a mini Me Too movement in 2020, it was a brave moment of confronting abuse and making the scene decidedly safer for everyone. But all anyone in the public took away from it was that there were apparently a bunch of abusive people in competitive Smash. That PR was bad enough for Nintendo when it was the responsibility of the grassroots competitive scene. If it happened on Nintendo's watch, that would be a disaster, and that might be something they're trying to stay away from. I believe that there is value that comes out of competitive esports scenes that matters more than money. Friendships are made here, and people find senses of identity and purpose that they don't find in other places. People learn and grow from their efforts. There are people who met at a Smash tournament, got married, and made their wedding into a Smash tournament. To me, these are good things that are worth spending money to get. But are they going to make Nintendo's investors any richer? I really don't think we'll be able to do that for them right now. Video games are fickle. There are way more of them than traditional athletic sports because they're commercial products. A grandfather can pass on his love of baseball to his grandkids, but even in households where multiple generations play video games, the dad may have grown up on Quake while his son plays Fortnite instead. A game has to be culturally ubiquitous to make Fortnite money, and most of the time there's just too much competition for that. If we're going to have esports in the foreseeable future, it needs to be grassroots. It needs to be run by people who know it and love it, and are willing to sacrifice on potential return on financial investment to make it happen. It needs to look like nerds running brackets on their laptops behind the TO desk, not business bros using buzzwords to convince investors to let them waste their money without a plan for making it back. Esports people should make a living, but they certainly won't make the kind of living they could with the skills they have. Maybe when we grow up a little more, we'll have professionals in our community who can figure out ways to make esports more profitable and make it more worthwhile for Nintendo to come to the table and work more closely with us. Maybe we'll have the leverage to get them to stop actively interfering and consider compromising instead of dropping the hammer on tournaments or content creators. But right now, I think we're either making money for someone or playing in well-run tournaments. I don't think we can have both.